Hello and welcome back to the Xamarin Forms tutorial where we work on a time tracker app. I'm Patrick and this is the Let's Create series. Now that we're successfully connected to Cloud Firestore, we can start creating repositories to access data within Firestore. So let's head over to the Firebase console and let's add a new collection to this user. And so this collection can be named anything. We're basically aiming for work and statements, but just for testing, let's go ahead and make a collection named test. Once we click next, we can use an auto ID, and let's make some fields of different values. So for a string value type, let's just use something like name, and we can just make this test. And then we'll add a field. And instead of string, we'll do number. And so we want integer as well as doubles. For the integer, we can do something like age, and age will be, 10. And then we'll add a field, and now we want a number, but this one will be a double. And so a good double is something like amount, and this amount can be like 1.12. Then we want to add a field, and we'll change the type to a Boolean, and we can just call this one flag. And then we'll add another field, and this one can be timestamp, and we'll call this one some date. And we'll set its date to something like tomorrow, and it'll be, something like 12:23 p.m. And then we can press save. And now we have 5 fields of different data types. We have an integer, we have a double, we have a Boolean, we have a string, and we have a date. So now we can head back to our project and we can make a repository for this. So let's head back to the project. Let's head over to our shared project. So I'm going to minimize all these so that we collapse all subfolders. And then I'll re-expand the shared project. I'll go into the services folder, and I'll right click and add a new class, and this one's going to be an interface, and we'll just name this one IRepository. So this repository is going to take a typed parameter, so we can just say T, and then we want that typed parameter to have a property of an ID, and that will be a string, and that will track the document ID in Firestore. So let's just say iRepository with a typed parameter named T, and we'll say where T extends some interface we'll create here in a moment, but let's call it iIdentifiable. So iIdentifiable. And that doesn't exist right now, but let's go ahead and just add it right above this interface for now. So we'll just say public interface iIdentifiable. And we'll just say this interface requires that anything that implements it has a string property. So string, we'll call it ID, and you must be able to get this ID. So that will require anything of type T in this iRepository to have an ID, which we'll use in the Cloud Firestore. And then we'll go ahead and create a couple methods. And so the first one we want is a task. We'll use a quick fix to import the using, and this will return a T, and we'll say get, and this will take in a string ID. And that'll go to Cloud Firestore, look up an ID, and return that item. We also want a task of a list to get all, so we'll say iList, and we'll import the using for the iList, and that'll take in a T. And then we'll call this one get all. And then we also want a way to save, which could be add or update. So we'll just say task, and bool will be the return type, and that'll determine if it was successful or if it failed. And then we'll just say save. And then the last thing we want is a way to delete. So we'll say task and then bool again, which will just determine if the delete was successful or if it failed. And we'll say delete. So now we have this repository, and we have the interface that determines if the item has an ID. And now we can go ahead and head over to the iOS project. We'll go to services, and we'll add a new class. And now we created some test data in the database. So just for now, just to make sure this works, let's go ahead and make a test data repository. So we'll just call this test data repository. And we also want to make a base repository per project. So let's go ahead and make another class. And this will be base repository. And this is so all of our repositories can share most of their code. And so the base repository will implement an IRepository, and it'll take in a type T. And so our base repository needs to have a typed parameter as well. And then we can use a quick fix on iRepository to import services. And then we'll have to implement the interface. We're going to make each of these methods virtual so that each child class has the opportunity to override as necessary. And then we need to place the same restriction on T. So we'll say where T implements IIdentifiable. We can get rid of this constructor here. And then we can make any child of this class tell us what the document path is going to be. So we can make an abstract member. So we'll say public abstract string, and this will be document path, and then we'll just say get. And this means any child of this class must determine a document path, and so we must make this class abstract as well. And now any child of this class must determine a document path, and that'll help us in the get method. So in the get method, we can go to Firebase Cloud Firestore. So we can say firebase.cloudfirestore.firestore.shared_instance. Then we can say .getCollection, and we can just use the document path. And then we can say .getDocument, and this will be of the ID we pass in. And then we can say getDocument again, and that will get the actual document, and it expects a document snapshot handler. So we can just do the same thing we've done before and just throw a Lambda expression in with snapshot as well as error. And then in here we could check if error is not null. And if it's not null, then something went wrong. And we can try to set the result of the task completion source, which means we need a task completion source. So above here we can say var tcs equals new task completion source, and this will be of type T. And then below everything, but still in this method, we can return tcs.task. Then if our error is not null, we can try to set the result, and this will just be default, and then we can return. Otherwise, we made it passed, so we need some way to convert that snapshot into the type T. So this is a good place to make an extension. So let's right-click the iOS project. Let's add a new folder, and we'll call this one extensions. I think that's a good stopping point for today's video. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments section. Thank you for watching the Xamarin Forms tutorial. I'm Patrick, and this is the Let's Create series.